It all started when I took a late-night job driving for a rideshare company. It seemed like a perfect way to make extra cash, especially since I was saving up for a down payment on my first house. I was used to long, uneventful drives around the city, but one particular night changed everything. It was close to midnight when I got a request from a neighborhood that was known to be a bit rough. The pickup location was an old industrial area, abandoned warehouses, rusted chain-link fences, and a thick silence hanging over everything. It was the kind of place where you knew not to ask too many questions. I pulled up to the location, and a man in his mid-40s got into the back seat. He had a hood pulled low over his face, but I could see his eyes in the rearview mirror, cold and calculating, almost inhuman in their detachment. The man barely said a word. He only gave me an address about 20 minutes away, in a suburban part of town. I tried to make small talk, asked how his night was going, the usual, but he just stared ahead, his fingers drumming on his knee, an uneasy rhythm that matched my growing sense of discomfort. There was something off about him, something that made the air in the car feel heavy, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. Halfway through the drive, he suddenly asked me to pull over. There was no place to stop, just a dark, empty stretch of road, but his voice was demanding. I hesitated, but he leaned forward, whispering, "Pull over. Now." I could feel his breath on the back of my neck, and there was something in his voice, a hint of desperation, but something darker too, like he was on the edge of a decision he couldn't take back. It wasn't a request, it was a command. I stopped the car, and that's when I noticed something glinting in his hand, a small, wickedly sharp knife. My heart began to pound in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins as a chill ran down my spine. He didn't move, just kept the knife in his lap, like a silent threat. "Drive to the river," he said, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. They were empty, devoid of any humanity, like a predator staring at its prey. I did as he said, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The river was another 10 minutes away, and each second felt like a lifetime. The city blurred past us, the streetlights casting eerie shadows in the car. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. Should I crash the car? Should I try to fight him? Every plan seemed like it would end with me in the back seat, bleeding out while the man calmly walked away. My breaths came in shallow gasps, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back, soaking into the seat. As we got closer to the river, he made a phone call. He spoke in short, clipped sentences, telling someone that it was almost done and that they should be ready. My blood ran cold. Who were they? What was almost done? My instincts told me that whatever was about to happen, I wouldn't walk away from it. We reached the river, and he instructed me to pull over by an old dock that was barely holding together. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years. Wooden planks rotting, rusted nails sticking out at odd angles, the entire structure swaying gently with the movement of the water. He got out and gestured for me to follow. My legs felt like lead, but I knew if I didn't comply, he wouldn't hesitate to use the knife. As I stepped out of the car, the cold night air hit me, and I could hear the water gently lapping against the wooden posts of the dock. The man led me closer, and my pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. Then I saw them. Two figures emerging from the shadows near the dock, both dressed similarly to him. They moved with a sense of purpose, as if they'd done this before. My heart was hammering, and I felt my legs weaken. I could see their faces now, blank, emotionless masks, their eyes empty pits that seemed to swallow the moonlight. One of them carried a length of rope. The other had something metallic glinting in his hand. I was about to make a break for it, run back to the car, when something happened that I still can't explain. One of the figures, a woman, glanced at me and her expression changed. She shook her head subtly, her eyes locking on mine. There was something in her gaze, a flicker of recognition, or maybe pity. She spoke up, her voice firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Not this one." The man with the knife frowned, and for a moment there was silence, tension so thick you could cut it with a blade. The other figure looked at her, then at me, and finally nodded. "He's not the one," the woman repeated, her voice carrying a strange finality. The man seemed frustrated, his hand twitching around the knife. For a second, I thought he was going to ignore them and finish whatever twisted plan he had started. His eyes darted to mine, and in that moment I saw something dark and hungry behind his gaze, a kind of madness that made my stomach churn. But then he lowered the blade, spat on the ground, and turned away. "Get out of here," he growled at me, his voice dripping with barely contained rage. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. I reached my car, jumped inside and sped away, my hands shaking on the wheel, my heart racing. I could hardly breathe until I was miles away from that place, from those people. The world outside the car blurred as tears filled my eyes, a mix of terror and overwhelming relief. My entire body ached, my muscles tensed from the fear that had gripped me. I never reported it. Who would believe me? A bunch of faceless figures in the night, a knife, and a reprieve given without explanation. It sounded like a bad movie. But every night since then, I've wondered, why did she say I wasn't the one? And how many times had they found the one they were looking for? Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the echoes of that night still rattling around in my skull. I hear the creak of the dock, the rustle of footsteps in the dark, and the cold, empty voice saying, "Not this one." I think about the others, the ones they did find, and I wonder what became of them, what horrors they must have faced at the hands of those people. And sometimes, just sometimes, I feel like I'm being watched, like the reprieve they gave me that night was only temporary, like someday they'll come back to finish what they started. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know it's not. I wasn't the one that night, but maybe someday I will be.